Hey guys, it's Fifth Lauren, also known as 944. Don't forget Thorin's YouTube channel.
Okay, this is episode 16 of Esports Salon, and this one is going to be around the topic of franchising. Now, you might say, there's been a few episodes on that topic before, because there actually has. I think there've been at least 2 on the topic. But in my defense, first of all, I've actually found people who are against it, so that's a good thing. Secondly, the other ones were technically about, hypothesizing what franchising might be looking like. And then there was the one where I just sort of got in with all the esports owners by letting them talk about how brilliant franchising is. But this one, as I say, actually has some pushback, perhaps some resistance. So the guests who are going to be on this episode are in the top right. I've got SirScoots, industry veteran, icon, just a guy who likes to post things on Twitter and gives opinions. So perfect for this show, right? The rest of it was all just preamble, Then in the bottom right, we've got Carmac, my old pal from ESL, who, if you haven't guessed, by the way, with this panel, is the person against franchising in some context, which is yet to be determined on the show. And then the last one, because somehow he always ends up on these episodes, does he suggest the topics? Does he suggest himself as a guest? Who knows? I don't know how. Maybe you're just the best guest, and it's my bias that gets
you just got him on this. Do I have incriminating evidence against Duncan? All of these are possible.
Exactly. Well, I mean, there's a lot of us have incriminating evidence against each other nowadays, So anyway, this show's
about...
You got
Tommy on the inside now.
Exactly. This show's just about having interesting conversations with no hurt feelings. So, Carmac, as I alluded to there, it's actually been very difficult whenever I've done a show on the topic of franchising to find anyone who's against it for 2 main reasons. One, usually the sort of people who appear on this show in some sense might financially benefit from franchising of a league. They're a tournament organizer who happens to be running the league, or they're a team who thinks they'd be a franchise. And the other factor is a lot of the people who are on this show, because it's an English language show, come from a background of American sports, and it's just considered the paradigm. They think that is kind of like how you know that esports has made it, when you have a similar sports model that they have in the NFL or the NBA or whatever. So where are you coming from in the angle of what sense are you against it, or do you have questions about it as a
Sure.
concept?
So, I mean, as a concept, number one, if I'm a team owner that's looking to potentially be a franchise team, I'm 100% against it. No questions asked, right? Because that gives me so much business security, is such a business advantage.
In favor of it, right? I think you said against it there. You mean in favor of it, yes.
Sorry, yeah. 100%
sure.
In favor of it, yeah. However, my general feeling about franchising is that I don't like the way it's been implemented so far in esports. I think there are ways to implement something like a partner program or something like that, where you retain all the benefits that typically get mentioned, which is, stability, being able to invest in the long term, for the league to partner up with partners that are actually serious and not a bunch of weirdos, if you will. But right now, the way esports does franchising, and the way esports does actually league structures for the leagues that have franchising, I think it's not beneficial. And it's going to be a little bit long-winded. I feel it has to do with how the value composition in the ecosystem is. Namely, if you create a limited set of teams, companies that have a right to forever be in the league, you give them all the wealth, and there's no wealth whatsoever, or very little wealth in the ecosystem left behind for everybody else. So if you think of those leagues, let's say the LCS or the Overwatch League, of the guys that are in the league right now, if you think of them as the present of the game, the future of the game is outside of that league, and they're not getting paid. They're not getting paid because there isn't any value for them to there's no value for them to take, no money to pick up, essentially, in the ecosystem, and there isn't an opportunity to go up. So, of course, any community will produce talent, but it's kind of a little bit, I'd compare it to, let's say, the NBA. If you rip out completely the college system and draft people straight from high school, you actually need players that play the same number of hours, the similar conditions to the guys in LCS, in Overwatch League, to actually, if you want to replace LeBron James, you want to have somebody that practices as much as LeBron James. Otherwise, you have no chance of finding somebody that's just as good. That's trying to make the long story short.
Okay. Right. Okay. So I mean, just to clarify here, I know in terms of your philosophy when you've been at ESL with some of the IM tournaments, for example, you have been a strong proponent, we did an interview on this once, of like an open qualification system. Like you really want it to be where if there was a guy at home who's never played, but he really was good enough, he could go through an online qualifier and maybe that gets him to a small tournament. The idea is there's no barrier to getting it. Is this part of the concern that if we lock in, say, 10 teams for CSGO, if someone's in Team 13, how is it more difficult for them to get into league? Is this something that's concerning you?
So since the interview, I've actually revised my views somewhat based on the reality of esports. But in general, what I think people should see a realistic way to feed into the league. So let's say in football or soccer, it works. You just get drafted, or you can advance with your team. In basketball, it works. You get drafted from the NBA and from the NCAA. But there, in basketball, where you have 300 seats in the NBA and you have 14 point something players per seat that have a college scholarship that can advance. So you have, if you take away Europe, if you take away Asia, you have 15 players competing for one NBA slot, technically. So that's a big funnel. In Overwatch League, in LCS, that funnel is much, much smaller because there's no economy below the league that would support that number of players. So while Noah can have one or two reserve teams, let's call them, and put his players on full-time salaries, that's 1-to-1, 1-to-2 ratio of let's call it the top pros versus the other full-timers. And is very, very far away from the NBA. So I'm not against franchising if they solve that problem, actually, and if it's actually large enough. Because if it's small, if it's 10 teams, if it's 12 teams, that doesn't work for me. I don't think that's good, especially in Europe, which is very, very diverse and needs, let's say, a larger number of cultures and groups represented, I feel.
Okay. So Noah, obviously, as I alluded to in the past episode, the one with Jack, etc., a lot of that was about the benefits of franchising. And since, you represent Immortals and he represents Cloud9, yes, you're going to give, as Carmac alluded to, the positives, because for your franchise, presumably it would be a positive thing to be within the league. I mean, ironically, that was about LCS to some degree, which didn't end up exactly working out. But you know what? Got there in the end. You're in the Overwatch League now. You got one franchise. So what would you say to this then? Because he's sort of talking about the teams not in the LCS at the moment, not in the Overwatch League. It's the teams just below or players who one day aspire to be in this franchise. What would you say to that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately he's kind of committing the fallacy of assuming that something that is theoretically infinite is better than something that is finite, right? So he's right? In Counter-Strike, theoretically, in a non-franchise system and in a completely open ecosystem, you can support far more players than a kind of team-limited ecosystem can support in Overwatch League or in LCS. Unfortunately, that's just not really how it works in the real world, right? Sure, CS has this theoretically infinite number of players that it can support, but in the actual world and ecosystem of Counter-Strike, that's not what we see, right? What we see is you have a top 20 to 30 teams in the world that make a pretty good salary, right? And once you drop off below that, players are not really making a living wage. Most don't even make a minimum wage based on the country that they live in.
30 teams in Europe, full-time players.
Sure, there are 30 teams in Europe full-time players, and some of those full-time players are making €1,000 a month playing Counter-Strike, right? And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But let's also look at Overwatch League, which has an average of 10 players per team, which is 120 players in the first year making a minimum of $50,000 a year with healthcare and retirement planning, let alone what that looks like as it continues to expand, let alone what the contenders ecosystem looks like as kind of a minor league and an academy system. So I agree with your core principle here, man, which is, yes, theoretically in Counter-Strike, if you just pump more and more money into the Counter-Strike ecosystem, you can support an expanding number of players. But when you have an open, non-franchised ecosystem, my assertion is that you can't really pump as much financial resources, infrastructure, time, and stability into an ecosystem that doesn't have a solidified franchise system. And my further assertion is that even though theoretically, if you could, you'd end up with more salaried and more full-time players, the limitations of an open ecosystem means that an open ecosystem will only temporarily outperform a franchise system. And that it doesn't really have the stability or the sustainability necessary for that to be a long-term investment and a long-term beneficial ecosystem for everyone involved. So I guess we agree in theory, but I think in practice, it's a little idealistic to think that just because the Counter-Strike ecosystem has the potential for hundreds of full-time players, that doesn't mean that that's a potential that you can reach with the current structure of the ecosystem.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts on this, Scoots, before we go back to them too?
Yeah. Thanks for having me, by the way. Obviously, last minute ad, so I haven't had much thought process about franchises lately. I agree in a way with both of them and disagree with both of them. And this is Scoots in 2018. I'm a totally different guy now. Okay. So I'm sorry. You probably wanted someone edgy and crazy, but like kumbaya, man. You know what I'm saying? No, I am as I'll put my hats on. So as a fan of Counter-Strike, we'll just use Counter-Strike for example. I love the open system of it. Always have. Right? It makes everyone work harder. So you've got tournament organizers that will compete for fans' eyeballs to entertain them better, for players to want to attend their events so they get treated better. We're starting to see that in reality, not just Counter-Strike, but obviously esports in general. Again, and any given Sunday, anyone can become a team owner, and man, with the right roster, you could do it. Right? There's no walls up anywhere, really, although we have some closed leagues that are relegated. But even via that relegation, you can get yourself into the top of EPL, the top of ECS, et cetera. So it's kind of a mix. We have our leagues that are not really franchise. They're franchisee by virtue of earning that right? So I kind of like, as a fan, the openness, right? Again, this more people competing, the better the pizza's going to be, right? But used to be a big team owner too, right? So I absolutely understand what Noah and I have talked about this several times in private, even about the stability and the longevity of open versus if you lock it down, what you can sell, all those things, right? What we don't know is how that really plays out, Noah. Like you do mention reality versus theory. The reality is what got us here, and the reality is open esports. The future is what you're building. But we don't know yet if you're right, so to speak. Is that accurate to say? The floor plan that you guys are now building with Overwatch League absolutely could be the answer, but it didn't get us to this. So we do have realistic things behind us when we think open system versus franchise. You're opening a brand new can of worms, right? Not only with the franchise model, but then the regionalizing of it and when you all move out. I am excited about all of it because I don't know if there's necessarily a right answer or a wrong answer, or if that's based on game, right? And publishers being involved, right? Valve will probably never want to do what Blizzard's doing with Overwatch, right? Will they do something similar? Will they get more vested? Maybe. So that also changes the just the facts on the table about different games, right? So I get both sides of it. I like the openness of the competitiveness of it. It also makes, if you salary cap a closed franchise league, then you could possibly limit player salaries, opens that up. But Noah's job is tough. Running a team now more than ever is really hard. So those stable, secure things, especially when there's millions of VeXii being dropped all around him, make a lot of sense when they're on paper in front of him, right? I can't deny that. It's logic on both sides, I think, in some regards, right? That's my overall take on it.
And Scott, I think you're right about where esports came from, right? I don't want to reject the roots of esports as an open ecosystem kind of thing, and certainly franchising isn't the thing that got esports to this point. But I would also say that you can't really look at the way the ecosystem works right now and assume that that can exist at steady state, right? The place where esports was born was not in $20,000 a month player salaries. It was not in 10-man media teams that create content around players. It was not in sports psychologists and physical trainers.
10-person media teams. You should know your LA Valiant, you're very pro-diversity.
Oh, sure. Fair enough. But the roots of esports and the sustainable open ecosystem that esports came from, and that Counter-Strike came from in particular, was at a much lower level of professionalism and investment and financial resources for players than exists today. And I don't think many people would look at the current Counter-Strike ecosystem and say, like, yes, this is 100% sustainable for all of the players and teams that are all making lots of money, right? Like, realistically, we're entering a period in Counter-Strike where there's going to need to be some serious introspection about the way that this ecosystem works, because like, shockingly, you can't afford to pay the 30th best team in the world $15,000 a month per player. Like, that does not make financial sense for a business. And there are a lot of teams in the world that are making a lot of money. And so if we think about our value system, not just as sustainability of the ecosystem, but of wanting to preserve some of the professionalism and some of the value that's been created over the last 2 years of investment or 3 years of investment, we can't just say, well, it came from an open ecosystem, and so an open ecosystem can survive forever. I mean, it can, but I don't think anybody would be happy with an open Counter-Strike ecosystem if player salaries drop by 50% next year, right? I don't think anybody would like an open ecosystem in which teams can no longer afford to produce content, and tournament organizers are forced to either reduce product quality or reduce prize pools or do something else to ensure the sustainability of their ecosystems. And so I think, go ahead. That's
well, I was going to say, I think you also, like, businessmen overspending does not mean they're right? Like, yes, there are overpaid players on our planet, right? In sports and in esports. So to your point, that gets really dangerous as a team owner, because when that all elevates past a revenue sustainable back end, it turns upside down, right? And so are we a little upside down in Counter-Strike? Possibly. I think also what is new in the last, let's say, 3 or 4 years to everything is this idea of stadiums and the spend into stadiums, and everything we're trying to recreate is still very experimental. Like, paying for these stadium events, whether they're, forget the franchise system for a second, right? This whole new, like, to your point, we went from very grassroots and a lot of open stuff, but now we're open and we're in big old venues that cost millions of dollars. That makes me nervous all around for, like, are we overspending in general in this? If we build it, they would come. Are we overpaying players? We went from 0 to 60. We went from ballrooms at CPLs in a very short period of time, so to speak, into arenas, right? And that Mikkel can speak to the cost of those kind of things. So, like, we have an insatiable fan base that needs this now, right? We've teased it, right? They need what Blizzard does every Tuesday, every night in that arena. Look how gorgeous that is. That is not cheap. That costs hundreds of thousands of dollars a night. So in some regards, you better franchise it so you can figure out how to pay for it, right? Again, to me, there's no easy answer, I guess. I'm rambling. It's a Wild West in a whole different way now with all this kind of spend, Noah. And again, I get why you guys collectively, like, why it makes even more sense than ever for a team owner to want to secure as much as possible. Like, I get the argument even more. I think Counter-Strike's the hard one.
I want to clarify a little bit, right? Like, I think this argument or this debate or whatever you want to call it becomes a little too simplistic if I just approach this from a team owner perspective. I think it's obvious why a team owner would want franchising, or most team owners would want franchising, especially if they have the financial resources necessary to play in that space. So I'm really trying to approach this in a probably still biased, but hopefully less biased kind of way, from a more like fan or ecosystem or player perspective, because I think that's a little more interesting. And the one thing I'll just pull out, right, in terms of an example of an ecosystem we can look at that has always been open and hasn't really been as much of a subject of these investment and speculative forces that play in Counter-Strike, is I would look at the Smash community, right? Like, Smash hasn't seen a massive 10x explosion in player salaries. They haven't seen a 10x explosion in prize pools. They've kind of been chugging along, right? And they've had some growth, but it's not as if comparing Smash of today to Smash of 3 years ago, it's not as if they have 5-person media teams that are creating content around them all the time. It's not as if they have 3 coaches per top Smash player. It's not as if the prize pools are $500,000, right? Like, they're kind of just chugging along. And so to the people that are thinking about Counter-Strike and thinking about how do you create a sustainable open ecosystem, like, if our ecosystem in Counter-Strike looked like Smash, it'd totally be sustainable, right? Pretty cheap, open tournaments, a few invites, but nothing that crazy for the top players and the top teams in the world. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think you'd be hard-pressed to find Counter-Strike fans that are like, yeah, I don't want any more Pro League. I don't want ESL 1. I don't want majors. I just want what Smash has, right? Of course fans don't want that because they want higher production quality. They want higher levels of
That's
competition.
what I'm saying. Like they've tasted this now, right?
Yeah.
And it's an expensive addiction. It really is. You can't go back. You can't go back.
What about this then? Carmac, would it be too cynical for someone to say, well, Carmac works for ESL, and at the moment at least, it doesn't look as though CSGO or Overwatch or whatever are gonna contract ESL to be the person who runs whatever their franchise league would be. So it's in the interest of ESL to want an open circuit where they can put on tournaments in any game and they can be a big player and they can choose how much to invest and how to go. Is any of that informing your thought on this?
I think everything I say holds up whether or not ESL is in the picture or let's say it's one publisher doing everything from start to finish, cutting out completely third parties. Okay. I think my logic will hold up if DreamHack, ESL, and Starladder, whoever else is completely removed out of the picture. And I don't think this conversation to me is about CS versus a specific one. I don't consider CS to necessarily be the healthiest one. But again, maybe to reiterate my point a little bit, to me, the problem is in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, who's playing and how good are they still? Because right now, if you put a league full of salaried players who are practicing full time, they're good. They got all the nutrition, all the coaches, all the team houses, everything. They're amazing. Now, outside of that, you're not having people that have the same level of support. So who's supposed to replace Bjergsen in TSM after Bjergsen decides I'm going to get married, I'm going to go to Tibet, become a monk, whatever? How do you replace Bjergsen if there's nobody outside of LCS that practices as much as Bjergsen and has a similar level of support? That is my biggest problem with closed systems, and it's not so much franchising as actually a closed league. Franchising makes the problem a little bit worse by closing off that, by taking off even the opportunity, the perception of the opportunity. And on top of this, it creates a situation where you can have, let's assume for a second that it's true what I'm saying, that franchise or closed leagues have a harder time building talent. If we assume that's true, as a team owner of a team that's between 5, 6, 7, has a famous player, let's use a real life example. He's going to hate me for it, but Ocelot. You don't win things with Ocelot, with Carlos, right? But he's famous and you can monetize the living hell out of him. Why would you ever be motivated to become competitive for first place if that comes at a price of guaranteed monetization where, you're in it for the business? So it's less competitive from that point of view. Okay. But again, I think if you want to produce better players, you want to put value in as many hands as possible. Because at the end of the day, if the four of us sit down and we play whichever video game, let's say it's Smash, all fucking day against each other, let's say it's 12 hours a day, we're going to improve to some degree. But because we only play against each other, we're only going to improve so much because there's only so many styles of play and so many skill sets between us. We will improve further if we get better nutrition, better coaching, all that support, essentially. So let's say we all go to our respective 110%, but we'll stop at some point. And when we go out to the real world and play against people who play competitively in a large group, we'll encounter styles of plays and meta games that we've never encountered before, and we die. We will get better, though, the more styles of play that challenge us we're exposed to. That's why Korean players are better than, let's say, outside players in many video games. They have so many different, very high-level players that the meta game just moves forward much quicker, and you're able to get better. I've had this when I was competing in judo, right? In my region, I was the best 2 years in a row in my weight category, undefeated. I went to the nationals and I would there's this guy taller than me. I don't know how to deal with him. And either I win or I lose, but it's a new situation. Whereas those guys that have plenty of very good sparring partners get better much, much quicker. So I personally believe, and I fully believe, that you need to put reasons for spending a ton of hours in as many people's hands as possible. So the number of people that really put in a great deal of time into getting better at the video game is very, very high. Because again, if you take 100 people, you're going to have a better number one than out of a group of 10 people. So the bigger the group that really practices, the better players you will end up producing.
Okay, I can see 2 points there. So Noah, the first one, if we rewind it back a bit, was when he gave the real world example. He gave the example of, if say your team owner who's at 6th place in the league, let's say it's a 10-team league, you're in 6th place. At the moment, you still have basically what we'll call a legacy name, a marquee name. You have Ocelot, who, I mean, funnily enough, if he even played today, probably still would have some interest. You know, people would be a spicy guy, even his style of play to some degree is entertaining. But in this scenario, what does motivate you or incentivize you to say, okay, it's time to bench Ocelot or it's time to remove him? And you know what? There's this new player who's come up. So in this world, it'd be through Challenger League or something. And he's not yet super famous because he hasn't played in the LCS, but he is better than Ocelot right now. But you also maybe aren't guaranteed you'll become number one if you get him. So you that gap there where you'd have to have a leap of faith. How do you incentivize someone in a franchise system or a closed system, which, yes, has similarities? What would you say to that?
Sure. So first, I would say, just from a values evaluation perspective, right? I've never really understood people that think about what's good for esports as like what produces the most objective in a vacuum talent, right? Like probably what would produce the most vacuum in a vacuum objective talent is just like stop broadcasting things, right? Get rid of all player Twitter accounts, lock them in hyperbolic time chambers, and have them practice against each other for 14 hours a day. Realistically, we're not going to do that, right? And so my evaluation of what is best for esports or a specific game community has nothing to do with like, does this make the average level of player skill better? And it has everything to do with, does this create a better experience for the fans that are paying to watch the game, that are spending their time and energy and lives being fans of this game? So I'm not at all going to talk about like what creates a better player, because frankly, like I don't really care. If you're a great player in the middle of the woods with no one watching you, it doesn't
in the
matter.
league 5 years from now, in 10 years from now.
So let's talk about that. So let's talk about that, right? The important thing to recognize is that it's not just about who has the incentives to develop talent, but who has the ability to develop talent, right? And you're absolutely right. In Counter-Strike, there are probably 60, 70, 80 teams in the world that all have the incentive to find the next great player. They all are looking for Nico or Rops or whichever unknown guy is going to rise to the top of the tables and become one of the best players in the world. But how many teams actually have the ability to create infrastructure around their players to help them develop? Because in Counter-Strike, you are separated into groups of haves and have-nots. You have your top 10, maybe top 15 organizations in the world that have real financial resources. They have real infrastructure. They have, you know, the coaching staff, the out of game coaching staff, the offices and facilities necessary to develop players. And then you have another 50 teams that have the financial resources necessary to pay $1,000 a month and hope they strike oil and they happen to recruit Nico or Rops before anyone knows that they're Nico or Rops, and then they just sell them to another team that has real infrastructure. Counterpoint, in a closed ecosystem, in a franchised ecosystem, you have teams that both have the ability and the incentive to create talent, right? Every team wants to win. Every team wants to win because winning is good business. Winning is a way to engage fans. And if there ever comes a point at which having Ocelot is less valuable than having a winning team, you can bet that every team will prefer to have a winning team. But it's not up to us to lecture the fans about which is more engaging, right? Like, I can't go on Twitter and be like, wow, you guys are just rooting for the most popular players. You should stop. Like, that's dumb. People don't stop liking what they like because someone tells them to stop liking what they like, right? So if fans are more engaged by having an Ocelot on a team, fair enough. But what I would say is, in a franchise system, because every team knows that they are long-term partners in the league, they have an incentive to look towards the long term of their fan engagement and of serving their fan base, right? Contrast that to Counter-Strike. Like, how many top Counter-Strike teams in the world have academy teams that they invest real resources into, have player development programs, have more than just the required 5 players on their roster? The answer is very, very few. And even the ones that have academy teams do not invest the same level of resourcing into those academy teams as they invest into their main teams. So in an open ecosystem where everything is player driven and everything is short-term driven, the same way it is in Counter-Strike right now, we can see from just a real world practical example that people are not investing significant resources in developing talent. But if you look at franchised ecosystems, whether that's English Premier League, which is quasi-franchised, right, because it has the system of promotion and relegation, but it at least has locked-in slots for people that are in the top leagues, independent of which players you have on your team.
Danger, you're talking about my favorite subject. I know a lot about it.
We're going to come back to that later, don't you worry. If you look at the NFL, if you look at the NBA, if you look at the MLB, all of these major leagues have massive infrastructures for the development of talent. They have huge farm systems, academy systems, collegiate programs, high school programs, youth play programs. These closed ecosystems in which you say team owners have no incentive to try to win within them, for some reason have far more. I'm gonna reduce your argument to the absurd, and then we'll come back to what you actually said. Hold on, I'm on Duncan's show. I know how to do this. But like in your example, like if your example was holding true in the real world, then wouldn't we see an NBA in which Michael Jordan retired and there wasn't anyone to replace him? Right?
No, hold on. That's because NBA has a feeder system in college where they have over 4,000 scholarships in college where players get paid. Essentially, in fact, you're getting value that justifies spending 50 hours a week practicing, which is actually very similar to what the NBA players play. Whereas you, as much as you'll have one or two teams, you're not getting to 1-15 ratio of in the league versus outside of the league.
But why do you think those scholarship programs can exist in an open ecosystem? Those scholarship programs don't exist for tennis or for golf. They exist for the NBA and the NFL and the MLB for a reason. Right?
Yep.
So it's not as if you can have an open ecosystem.
No, people go to get golf scholarships and
they absolutely exist. But if you want to talk about scale, right? If you want to talk about scale and where universities invest their resources for talent development and which sports are better at supporting their talent development systems, then
golf
there's no doubt.
Golf doesn't build schools. Yeah.
Golf doesn't build schools and tennis doesn't build schools. And there might, So from my perspective, look, I agree with you. I care a lot about talent pipeline, man. Like, I don't want to be in a situation where 5 years from now, all the Overwatch League players are 30 years old and they're not actually some of the best players in the world anymore. But I also, in Counter-Strike, if you look at the current Counter-Strike ecosystem, like more Overwatch League pros have been discovered in the first year of Overwatch League than Counter-Strike pros in the last 2 years of Counter-Strike. Like, Sure.
Overwatch had no esports. Like, it got stifled. That's even
again. I don't want to pull this out as the definitive example, right? But unfortunately, we just don't have a long history of franchised esports leagues to really refer to, right? So there's few examples for me to cite. But it's not as if this open ecosystem of Counter-Strike is constantly promoting new players to the top of the world, right? Like, there are a few players that break out every year, and that's great. And those are great stories when we have the ability to tell them. But, like, FPL is not a robust talent development system. Like, it's great that we discovered ROPS from there, but that doesn't mean that FPL is like the end-all be-all when it comes to Counter-Strike talent development. And it's not as if having smaller organizations that pay their players $2,000 a month is a real way to actually develop talent. If we want to actually develop talent, that takes infrastructure, that takes time, that takes scale. And those are all things that require, number one, a long-term focus on talent development, which no Counter-Strike organization and no Counter-Strike tournament organizer can actually afford to do in the current ecosystem. It requires massive financial investment that doesn't pay off for a very long time. And for anyone that is active in Counter-Strike, whether it's ESL, whether it's the sponsors, whether it's the teams, nobody has the ability to think more than a year ahead because of the swings of an open ecosystem and the volatility of an open ecosystem, right? If I'm NIP or Fnatic, I'd always just rather recruit the random Swedish player from the next best team. If I'm SK, I'd always rather recruit like the top talent from a team that's already good.
How is that bad?
How is that bad?
Yeah.
Because that's not talent development. If I say I'm the number one team in the world and I need a new player.
Why do you need to be the developer of talent? Let's play a devil's advocate for a second.
Sure.
Why do you need to be the developer of talent if talent develops in the ecosystem anyway?
Talent isn't developing in the ecosystem anyway. That's exactly the point I made before. If you look at
in Argo Gaming, bunch of nobodies a year ago, top 8 star ladder right now. Top 8
okay,
Duncan?
Yeah, they made top 8. Yeah, and that's great, right? And like when Argo becomes consistently a top 5 team in the world, I think that could be really cool, right? Come on, we're not going to pull out one tournament examples and claim that that is indicative of a massive development of talent. Players can get better, but like, and I don't want to call out Argo as an example as an organization because I just frankly don't know enough about them, right? Like maybe Argo is investing significant resources in coaching and a campus, and they're giving these guys so much support, and that's fine.
I think you're overrating the infrastructure element. The basis to becoming really good is to play all day. If you have a bunch of players who will play all day, if you have 1,000 players, let's say, that play all day, they will be better than 100 players under franchise tutelage.
Yeah, I think we have massively different ideas about what actually develops talent. I think playing all day develops talent in a particular way, and it does not at all prepare you for a professional lifestyle or what it takes to be a professional player. And I would 10 times out of 10 always pick to have 200 players in a structured academy system with coaches, with sports psychologists, with nutritionists, with physical trainers, than have 500 players that just sit in front of a computer for 14 hours a day. Like, this is the most StarCraft mentality I've ever heard. This is incredible.
I told you I didn't need to be here, Duncan. Told you this would be good without me.
What about this though? Okay, I've got one for each of you. So, Carmac, from your perspective, okay, when you're talking about giving the guy, even the player himself, who is in the franchise league, an incentive to play and to practice as much as everyone, because you want them to practice as much as possible and get all the diversity of different styles, so we get the best players. If I take Noah's argument, a way you could reframe that is, well, the good thing about a franchise system is we'll get more money in the top end of it. That'll come in from the sponsorship, from the revenue. In fact, that's actually an aspect to the franchise model, obviously, that even if my team's, the 9th best team in the franchise system, if Noah's is the best and he's killing it with all the deals and the revenue of the league is huge, we're all sharing the revenue. We're getting the broadcast rights. We're all sharing that. Even the guy who's on the 9th best team perhaps can put more into talent development, or he can have an academy team, or he can spend money on his psychologist or training. Just for getting better players, that does help in some degree, right?
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. I'm not saying it doesn't. I don't think it's enough. And Noah, you can giggle all you want. I come from sports, right? I'm an actual judo instructor. So I've gone through an actual sports system. So I know firsthand how, where I got held back, where others, went forward. And I really believe that increasing the diversity in talent, increasing the number of people who have skills that challenge you, who have different attitudes, different, if you put 100 people to think about a problem, they're going to probably likely come up with better solutions than 10 people put on the problem.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that if you sit down and play aimlessly for 12 hours, you're going to be as good as Bjergsen or as good as somebody else in the Overwatch League. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the guys that have a reason to get better for competition, let's say Argo Gaming or a bunch of other Counter-Strike teams or any other teams, they're definitely trying to get better with a certain aim. Maybe they don't have, a nutritionist. Maybe they don't sleep as many hours as they're supposed to. Maybe they don't have 3 coaches and things like that. But I just think that, again, they need to compete. They need to actually compete for something. The only thing that gets you ready for competition is actual competition.
Yes. Okay, right. Put a pin in that for a sec, because that's my question. Basically, I'm going to reframe to Noah. I have a question just as a follow-up here, just to clarify your position, Carmac. Basically, what I was trying to lead to with that aspect of, the sort of the franchise system will take care of the top players and perhaps some of the people feeding into it. My question to you would just be this. You have presented your side from a very abstract sense of I'm not a guy trying to just get the most money. I'm not trying to get the best for the teams. It's just I'm trying to get the best competition. Is it not a concern that if you have the open ecosystem, you might get the best players, but even the best players might get paid less than in this franchise system? Where do you come down on kind of the pragmatism versus the idealism? Like, do you think an open ecosystem could actually support the best players the same way as a franchise system? Whether it's happening now or not,
I think that's a question for you, Michal.
Yeah, it's for you, Carmac.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so obviously if you narrow down the club of teams that participate, you increase their value and you increase their ability to pay the top players. So in a franchise system, I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest that the number one player will be paid more than in an open system. However, I come again from a point of view that I prefer 100 people on $100,000 salary per year than fewer people on $1 million salary. I'm not going to do math on air.
Okay. Right, Noah, here's the way that, what Carmac was saying there, I'll basically summarize it like this. Something like StarCraft's a pretty good example, because obviously in StarCraft, initially, especially when you didn't have as much cross-competition, there was a huge gap, actually, between, for example, Korea, which was the best league, and the Western players and people just playing on the Grandmaster EU ladder or the Grandmaster NA ladder, playing an online cup, If they went to an offline tournament, they essentially had almost no chance. Like, maybe some guy who was like a 1 in a million genius player who doesn't really represent his region in that sense. He's not like indicative of how good people from Sweden are, for example. Maybe he had a chance, but it was quite ridiculous. And in fact, one of the equalizing factors in a game like StarCraft was to go and just immerse yourself in Korea. You would go to Korea for a month, you would play their ladder, you would play in the GSL. And actually, funnily enough, early on, usually, no matter how good you were in the Western leagues, you did actually do pretty badly early on. But if you stuck with it, you would acclimatize. If you had the ability to expand your skills a certain degree, you would. If you wouldn't, you'd go home again, you'd forget about it, you'd say, right, I'll go back to my little pond where I was the big fish, as it were. Now, in League of Legends, we don't really ever get a chance to see this because we had the LCS. What happened was the LCS meant TSM, the best NA team for most seasons, was in the NALCS. They were playing against the best NALCS teams. Usually they did very well. They were always in the final up until this last split. And then they would go to the World Championships. And truth be told, yes, to some degree, the gap might have closed, but it never closes in as much as they're never going to win the World Championship, it seems like. Now, people who come from the world of me and Carmac here, who come from these games which were more open-sourced in the past, and there wasn't the same restrictions, would probably suggest it's actually the franchise or closed league system that meant you couldn't kind of get the hybrid there. You couldn't have someone go and do a season in LCK or go to Korea for 2 months because, unfortunately, it just kind of was prohibited by the fact you had to compete regionally. So purely on that angle, is that something that's a concern for someone who does a franchise league? Is that even an issue to you? It sounds like a very abstract point, I know, but is it something you're concerned about?
I mean, no, again, for two reasons, right? Number one, I think we're just talking about a different values-based system here, right? Like, I'm not a believer that the point of esports should be to reach the highest possible levels of objective player skill and competition, okay, right? I'm a believer in that esports is something that serves a need of entertainment for fans, right? And players, I would prefer them to be better, right? Because the better that they are, the more entertaining it can be. But again, if you have 100 of the most skilled players in the world playing in the middle of a forest with nobody there to watch them, that doesn't create an esport. So let's leave that aside, and I'll still engage along the framework.
It doesn't create entertainment.
Okay, it doesn't create entertainment.
That's a different story.
Sure. I'm of the opinion that for esports to be scalable, there needs to be a spectating audience, right? It cannot be purely participatory. There needs to be people that enjoy watching, not just that enjoy play. You can disagree with that. I'm still going to leave that aside and buy into your framework just because I think it creates a more interesting discussion. So even if I do buy into your framework where we should prioritize the development of talent over everything else, what you're talking about with geographic limitation isn't actually inherent to a franchise model, right? If you look at Overwatch League, and I know I did the panel with you, Duncan, before the start of Overwatch League about geographic restrictions, but Overwatch League doesn't have any rules about not letting enough Korean players come over and play, right?
Yes,
there are plenty of Korean players. There are plenty of Korean players. And you're right. I 100% agree with you that when American teams get to play against Korean teams, they become better, right? As you expose more people to an equal competitive ecosystem, they kind of reach towards the same outcome. When you have players from Brazil that play against players from Europe, they have the ability to kind of perform on a similar level to their European peers. I think that's objectively true. Here's the problem. In traditional sports, which have, I don't want to canonize traditional sports, but they do have a much longer history that we can look at for examples. We unfortunately don't really have control cases, right? The LCS is very unique in that it created multiple quote unquote franchise leagues, even though they weren't like fully franchised until recently, but that were divided based on region, right? So North American teams just could not play against Korean teams or Korean players all that frequently because there were limits on how many Korean players there could be. Unfortunately, we don't really have a counterexample from traditional sports, right? Like we don't have an American football league like the NFL, but then also an open ecosystem everywhere else in the world where people go play football, right? We don't really have a franchised European soccer league, but then an open soccer ecosystem everywhere else. There's no franchised tennis league anywhere.
Yeah, we MLS in Europe actually, but I get your point.
Right. So my point here is, at a certain point, we start diving a little too much into theoreticals, right? Like I just fundamentally disagree with the way that Michał describes how talent gets developed, right? I do not believe that you develop more talent as you just throw more monkeys into a room with a typewriter and hope that some of them figure it out. But you know what? I can't disprove it, right? I don't have counterexamples to show how this does or doesn't work, because it's not like there's one football league that throws a bunch of monkeys in a room with a typewriter and another football league that gives them coaches and teaches them English, and you see how well it works.
You have that example in Korea versus North American LCS, where in LCS it's a smaller pool of players who have a certain skill ceiling, and you have a ton of really good players for whatever reason, probably PC bungs if I were to guess. In Korea, they are practicing against each other. The meta is going, again, quicker because you're going to have for 3 great mid laners in North America, you're going to have 15 in Korea. They're going to get way, way better. And obviously, they will produce better players because good players produce more good players. That's how it works. That's how talent develops. So what I'm saying is more salaries produces more good players, and more good players in turn produces even more good players. That's my point.
Yeah, but my point is that that's not just a process that randomly occurs. And I think you are crazy if you're trying to isolate the reason of Korean esports success as PC bongs, right? I would also say that Korean teams, for most of their history in League of Legends, have had much stronger infrastructure and better coaching and a culture that means that their players are more likely to listen to that coaching. And there are 10 other reasons that have nothing to do with just raw player numbers for why Korean teams could be good. Any of those reasons could be the reason, but none of us can actually prove that. So what I'm saying...
Okay, sorry, no, I think we got your point there, right? Carmac, what about this? Since you touched on it before, that one of your favourite topics is obviously the English Premier League, and obviously you are a supporter of Liverpool Football Club, right? I actually, I know a little bit about football from many years ago when I used to watch it, but I'm not super knowledgeable about the industry of football. So I actually would like to know this, because as I alluded to in the intro, I've never actually had anyone on the show who knew about European sports, basically. They all come from the world of, they aspire for LCS to be the NBA. They aspire for Overwatch to have the NFL, that's the model they think is the promised land. Obviously, European soccer in its own context is incredibly successful, and the Premier League is a great example of this. Likewise, Serie A, you can go around the world and find these leagues, but they don't use a strict franchise model. In theory, the best team in the Premier League is Manchester City at the moment. They could, if they really fuck up everything in the next season, be relegated, and they will not be in the Premier League. They'll have less opportunity to make revenue. In theory, everything could go to shit. So essentially, at the moment, a lot of the esports people are going to tell you and me, Carmac, right, we need the franchise model. That's how we're going to get the big bucks, and we're going to get to a high level. How has soccer or football done it without the franchise model? And is there anything we can learn from that could be brought into the esports space that means we don't have to have Noah make us a franchise league to get to the big time?
So I think primarily Europe and America approach leagues differently. So in Europe, it's primarily a sport. If me and my friends start a club in our fucking village and we're just amazing at what we do, we can win the Champions League 10 years from the time we start, right? In America, it's very much a business. They do things that are unthinkable, right? They move the franchise from New York to Dallas, or from Dallas to Milwaukee, or whatever, and that really is something that shocks many Europeans. Now, again, frankly speaking, I have an easy time accepting franchises in the NBA because they have a very robust system of delivering talent. To me, that's the biggest part. The next thing is, and I'm not answering your question, I'll get to that in a second, but the next thing is, actually, I'm not 100% against franchising as long as it's open enough and it gives actual opportunity for people to have an incentive to invest. Because right now, I don't think Scoots, if he was starting a gaming team right now, I don't think he'd invest into a contenders team. I don't think he's got any reason to invest into a contenders team in Overwatch. He'd invest into maybe an upstart Dota team, an upstart whatever other game team, but definitely not Overwatch. Fortnite maybe. That's just not a place where you want to invest your money. I think overall, if you, let's say, have franchising, yes, and you have all the benefits where Noah can put long-term money into his team and have a guarantee that he's safe for the next number of years. That the league can work with Noah because they know he's a reliable partner. He's great. He's fantastic. And yet there's open spots where people can come in and out, potentially drop in, drop out. That to me is better than the completely locked up, closed system that we see today. So in principle, actually, franchising with a large number of cities, large number of markets is fine, especially that they have, again, thousands of players in the system below that they draft from. I don't think LCS, I don't think Overwatch League in the next 5 years will have a 15-to-1 ratio of players that are playing full-time below the league that are aspiring to be in the league. I don't think it's going to be close to NBA numbers, and if you add Europe and Asia as a source of players, then it probably jumps to 25-to-1 as a ratio. I consider that healthy. Now, when it comes to European sports, I think the big difference between European sports, like let's say Premier League and let's say Overwatch League or LCS currently, is the number of teams, right? If Manchester City completely crashes and never comes back, there's still plenty of really good teams with history, with marketing, with the whole machine left there. So the potential damage isn't so big. However, if TSM were to crash and completely be gone, the damage relative to LCS would be humongous in comparison. So I think where the big leagues in Europe are way more stable and can absorb a team crashing out for several years or maybe forever, much better than a smaller ecosystem with 10 teams like we do have in LCS right now.
Okay. Right, Noah, a way I think we could take that and I could ask you a question about it would be this. At the moment, one thing I will say up front is, obviously I don't know the exact revenue that each major league makes, and definitely not the big teams. I could only spitball and guess. But if I had to kind of find a way to make an example from that, what about this? So in something like the NBA, and admittedly, one of the main problems we're going to have here is there is no control group in the American sports, because typically the American sports aren't played near as much in Europe, whereas, football is played around the world. It's kind of it's obviously, it's apples and oranges, you can't compare directly. But just taking the abstract element, if I took Carmac's angle of, like, at the moment, there's only this many teams in the league and, where are all the players below? If you've already got a feeder system like college, cool, that's taken care of. But in a world of the Overwatch League, so we have 12 teams in the Overwatch League or 10? I think it's 10.
12 right now.
12, okay, there's 12. There was 10 in LCS famously, right? In that world, the big concern becomes if it gets great for those 10 or 12 teams, but either it takes many years, let's say it takes 10 years to get the scene below it to build up, so the next 10, the next 20 teams are really good. That's a problem. Whereas in European soccer, for example, so that's comparable to the NFL. The NFL has, I don't know how many, 26 franchises, something like that, 26 teams that are basically football teams. in the European side of things, you have the Premier League. Now, let's say of the however many teams there are there, let's say the top 10 are doing pretty well financially. I won't say they all are. There are teams that get in that aren't that big. Let's say you have Serie A, the Italian league. Let's say the top at least 5 or 6 is doing pretty well. You have the Spanish league. There's a very minimum top 5, 6, 7. Right? Either these all have to be franchises to get this many teams and you have to scale up the franchise aspect, or to some degree, isn't that kind of a more open circuit? It can support more teams, right? Because in a way, it's like the rich get richer in the American franchise model. Can you see where the gap is at the moment in esports in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's obviously a gap. I think there are a lot of like bad arguments getting made here, though, right? Like, of course, the NBA has a good talent pipeline, but the NBA didn't have a good talent pipeline in year 5 of the NBA, right? Like, that took a few decades to build. I mean, what you're saying about European football is like kind of right. It is a more open ecosystem, but I would not describe it as a fully open ecosystem, right? This isn't a tennis or a golf or, you know, let's use tennis doubles as an example, since that's more of a team sport than it is an individual sport. But like me and 10 friends from South Korea can't just like decide to enter a qualifier for the English Premier League tomorrow. So like it's still a somewhat closed ecosystem. It's not a fully open ecosystem in the way that game like Counter-Strike is, not even close. And further, what I would say is like, if you look at the English Premier League system or the broader European football system, and you look at where the talent comes from the academies of the top 10 clubs, right? Are you going to be crazy about this? Like, the academy system in European football is massive. Like, sure, there are always counterexamples, right? Like, you're always going to have the guy that gets discovered randomly in Brazil. You're always going to have the, like, Brazilian league people that move up. Okay, do you want to make your counter-argument now? Because I can't do this with the faces you're making.
All right, I'm going to Google Manchester City now, the squad, and I'll tell you how many homegrown players they have in their squad that broke all the records in the Premier League. You please continue.
No, please do that first. Honestly, I can't talk if you're going to make those faces in the back.
Wait a minute. One thing I think might be confused here is when Noah says that, he means as in it's the academy teams that are bringing up the top players, not specifically to that club. Like, he doesn't mean the players in Manchester City come from Manchester City's academy.
I don't mean the Manchester City players come from Manchester City Academy. I mean the academy system that is created. Glad we avoided that.
Okay, so... in Europe, plenty of players come from plenty of different sources, right? Every top team, or most top teams, will have, let's say, 2 to 3 academy graduates in the 23 people squad that plays in the league, right? The rest of it, and obviously those that don't really graduate to the first team at Real Madrid or Barcelona, obviously may be good enough for teams slightly below that pecking order. So they're going to produce a ton of players and graduates that will end up playing football somewhere. But at the same time, there's a ton of players, somewhere at the bottom or maybe in the weaker leagues that get produced by, every club essentially in Europe has, in all the leagues that I'm aware of, I may be wrong, but has an obligation to have an academy from, I think, 7 years old all the way to 23 or something like that. And they keep producing talent all the time. So in Europe, that is the system. And obviously that works. Top teams, though, most of them actually draft players from wherever, right?
Well, scouting's a big thing, isn't it? They send them out and you watch all over the world.
Scouting's a huge thing, right? You've got players constantly going from South America to Europe, but I'm not sure what this is a parallel of right now. I think I've lost my.
Bring us back.
Well, no, I think his point was that the teams themselves are training this tier 2, tier 3. They might not stay with said team, but they go into the ecosystem trained by an organization, if you will, or assisted.
However, the difference is that it's not just the Premier League that has 20 teams and then 20 academy teams. It's the Premier League, it's the Championship, it's the first, second, third division, and all those systems have full-time players that are playing.
Yeah, sure. The same way you have in the NBA, you have the D League, you have college leagues, you have high school leagues, right? Totally understand, right? Like, we're agreeing about the need for a talent pipeline. Nobody's saying that differently. The question is, where is that, if we're going to talk about franchising versus open ecosystem, right? Like, and I agree Premier League and the European football leagues are a little bit of a weird example because they're in the middle, right? They're not fully closed, but they are much more closed than a fully open ecosystem. So the question is, if we're comparing fully open ecosystem to fully closed ecosystem, rather than trying to hash out on exactly which side the EPL falls, where is that equivalent of a talent pipeline in tennis or golf?
So I think the only, and I'm a little bit out of my depth here because I'm talking about Dota, but the one ecosystem that's actually kind of, let's call it fully open for teams, is Dota. Because CS is in fact kind of like a franchise hybrid model, because the ones in top 8 of the rankings that get all the invites, they're essentially franchises for now, because they get invited to all these events.
I don't think that's accurate, right? Like, I think the EPL, ESL Pro League, and ECS are kind of quasi-franchise leagues, right? They're closed, but with a system of promotion and relegation. I think if you look at the most important tournaments, right? If you look at the most important tournaments, the ESL ones, the majors, the Blast Pro Series, right? Like, those always have open qualifiers for them. There's always an ability for anyone.
But his point is the franchise teams are also getting the invites, although they're not.
To give you an example,
as long as they keep up performance.
So last year,
sure.
one of the reasons why I actually made a video which sort of wrecked Virtus Pro was because not only did they do terribly, but I went back and counted, and almost every tournament they were in, they just got invited. So actually didn't matter that they were terrible. They just got invited to every tournament and they got to go and come last place. So obviously they're not literally franchises, but it's not a purely open ecosystem in CS in that sense.
Sure, but here's where we get back to and again, like, this is what happens when you have discussions without a clear set of definitions and values evaluation, right? Because, like, I'm not against the idea of ESL inviting Virtus Pro to an event if Virtus Pro drives more viewership because people like them versus them being good. Let's leave that aside and still buy into the framework that it's just being good that matters, right? And let's use the Valve Majors as an example, right? Like, the Valve Majors are technically somewhat closed because if you finish top 8, you get an invite to the next one. But realistically, we would never describe the Valve Majors as an even close to franchise ecosystem. Right? Any team in the world can qualify for a Valve Major. Sure, it isn't 100% of the slots are open for open qualifiers, but it's like pretty close to a fully open.
There's some pathways there for sure.
Yes, you can go through the minor and you can get it. Okay, so Carmac, you sidetracked yourself there by triggering him with the word franchise. And what were you going to say about Dota, though?
So Dota's, I believe, the closest thing to a completely open ecosystem in teams. And again, I'm talking out of my depth. I'm not a specialist here, but they have much more openness in terms of qualification than CS has, for example, because CS is very heavy on the invites, and in practice, those invites do serve as, let's call it preferential slots, let's call them, right? And that's how the game is played. And actually, if you want to create a show, I'm actually with you in the sense that it has to be a show that attracts viewership and makes money. So that's the reason every organizer in the world will want to, invite Astralis and soon to be something else, SK Gaming, to their Counter-Strike events. Somebody flinched in the conversation.
Wasn't me.
Took him this long to get that reference in there, but well done. You got it in.
I do know where you're going with this, Michal, right? Like, and I'm really glad you brought up Dota, right? I'm really, really glad you brought up Dota, because you know which of the major esports has the worst talent development pipeline, the least amount of new talent making it to the highest ranks, the oldest average player age on the top teams? It's Dota. Dota, despite having a completely open ecosystem, as close to an open ecosystem as you're going to find in any major esport nowadays from a major publisher, is the worst of the major esports in all of these things. It does not have a bunch of organizations that support players full time. In fact, most of the top, not most, but a good number of top teams in the world are basically player owned and player created. And they're not sustaining themselves on salaries. They're sustaining themselves on prize money from Valve and from tournament organizers, which doesn't work at all for the lower tiers of competition who can't even make it to the biggest tournaments.
That's correct.
And so in this open ecosystem, much like in the open ecosystems of tennis and golf, and much like the open ecosystem of CS, you have a top tier that does tremendously well. Your top 10 teams in the world have a great time of it. They make a ton of money. They have tons of fans. And for everybody else, the system sucks.
However, I don't think so. Again, I'm just quoting a friend of mine who knows Dota very well. I believe in Dota, there's pretty much a 16-year-old doing extremely well at the international, a completely unknown new guy.
Yes.
Practically every
There's
year.
always going to be counterexamples.
You tell me.
One player does not make a talent pipeline.
Hold
like
on
Sumail is great, but Sumail is not proof that Dota's good at developing talent.
But you tell me when there's going to be the next 16-year-old in League of Legends from the West that shits on Bjergsen.
I mean, okay. Again, I think LCS is not the right example here because it's region locked, and if you're only going off of competitive, I mean, if you look at Overwatch, there are a ton of random 16-year-olds that are insanely good.
I think it's hard to look at Dota because the minute the TI became the international, really became what it is now, it dramatically changed the entire ecosystem of that game. Like, go back before the international was worth millions of dollars, and Dota looks more like Counter-Strike, right? It's totally different now. That carrot they're dangling has absolutely turned that into an anomaly to discuss, right? So I don't know if it fits, right?
Well, I actually think maybe it fits better than Counter-Strike. If you look at the way that TI is created, of course, like it has a warping effect on the ecosystem. But technically, it's as close as you're going to find to a purely community-funded tournament as anywhere else in esports, right? Like it is the closest proportionally to dollars that a fan wants to contribute to the event versus dollars that a team or a player gets out of it, right? It's as close to a one-to-one comparison as you can get. Compared to like Counter-Strike, where you have to kind of approximate the value of a viewer and do it on sponsorships and do it on broadcast dollars. So
that's what I'm saying. We can't compare because they don't give us the tool to do it in Counter-Strike. Like if we could compare them both.
Well, you could do it in Counter-Strike, right? Like tournaments could absolutely create crowdfunding mechanisms.
But we're not. I'm saying I guess we don't have the comparison.
But the reason I'm comparing it to tennis and golf is because that's kind of how tennis and golf work, right? There's no Valve for golf that hands down prize money. There's no Riot for tennis that like creates prizing for tournaments out of thin air. These are community-supported businesses, right? These are community-supported tournaments.
It'd be the PGA and the ATP, actually, who the two businesses that run those sports actually organize all those tournaments and the prize money and the sponsors.
But those are also community-driven organizations that are representative of the broader international tennis community, right? Like, they don't own the game of tennis. Someone could start a new ATP if they wanted to.
Sure. Well, I could start an NFL if I could start an NFL if I wanted to. It's a whole different argument in the sense of IP. Like knowing, like we could start a football league. We wouldn't be successful. People have tried it.
Hey,
we couldn't start an Overwatch league. We couldn't start a Counter-Strike league without approvals, right?
Yeah.
That's a whole different.
That's a whole nother story about why esports.
Like the ball is owned in our world, right? Yeah.
Luckily, we have reached the end of Noah's time, so he's not. This is, as usual, he just pipes out of his show. He doesn't even stay till the end of the show. So what I think we should do is let Scoots play a Jerry Springer-esque role and give his final summation. At which point we'll just accept whatever Scoots' final words are, because it's quite clear that Carmac thinks you need a lot of players to all compete against each other to get the best players. No, Whinston doesn't give a fuck. He's running the WWE and he just wants the big stars, all the bucks, and don't worry, he'll take care of all those young guys and make sure they get all the coaches. Yes.
Okay. Let me rephrase this. Let me sum up these arguments. I believe that infrastructure is crucial to talent development.
Yes.
And Carmac believes that if you just stick people in a basement with a computer, they're going to come out as the next esports Einstein. And that's how you create emails. You just have lots of people.
American political debates. Okay.
You just have a bunch of monkeys banging on typewriters, and at some point, Sumail arises and becomes the next William Shakespeare. And I actually think. I actually think, Duncan, like we ended up talking about a very different conversation than franchising versus open ecosystem, because I don't think Carmac actually was the like pure anti-franchising straw man that we needed.
I don't think there is one that exists, unfortunately. But we did what we could.
Richard might come close, but anyway, I think there's actually probably a lot more meat on this bone for a future version of Esports Salon, in which we would just talk about talent development, right? Because I think what me and Carmac are saying are just like we're voicing two very different ideas about how to develop talent. Like, I think Carmac.
You know what? If you're Astralis and you have all the money, let's assume. Well, are they actually solvent? Let's assume they haven't. Well, let's pretend that anybody is. I'm not sure if anybody is right now, but let's pretend. If you're Astralis, you can still have your academy, and then you're going to have dozens of teams that play full-time and compete full-time and still develop their players in a way which is inferior. I'm going to give it to you. It is inferior. Of course, if you have a coach and if you have a nutritionist and you have all the sports science behind it, it's superior. But at the end of the day, there are players that, thanks to the fact that they just get to play full time, their talent shines.
So let me sum up what I'm saying in a as concise a way as possible, right? I think from my perspective, when you have an open ecosystem, you have a group of halves, like a group of 10 or 20 teams that are in a really good spot, right? They have the best players in the world. They finish first at all the tournaments. They get all the invites. They do great, right? Then you have like another group that's kind of in the middle. They have teams that are in the middle. They do okay. But they're not the best. And then you have a bunch of people that like don't really have any resources, right? In contrast to that, a franchise ecosystem has 10 to 20 or maybe 30 teams that are all on a very similar level, right? If you look at Overwatch League, all 12 teams have roughly similar amounts of financial resources and infrastructure. As the league expands, that will continue to be the same. And then after that, there's a steep drop-off. My assertion is I would rather have 30 teams that are on a similar level of resources and infrastructure and then not have anything else below it, and assume that those 30 teams can build better infrastructure together than when you have a smaller number of teams where the wealth is concentrated, but a kind of slower ramp down on the resources that other teams have. Like I would every time choose to like get rid of this middle ground of like teams that kind of have resources but kind of don't, in order to concentrate more resources in a greater number of teams at the top. That's my assertion, and that's what I think develops talent in a better way, and that's also what I think creates a better viewer experience, which again isn't really the debate that we're having here, but is certainly my view of what matters most from an esports ecosystem perspective.
Okay. Closing remarks, Carmac?
Well, what Noah describes is this pipeline. What I'm looking for is this pipeline. That's it.
One of those is a pipe, and one of those is not in the shape of a pipe.
Funnel. One's a funnel upside down.
This is ESL Carmac in favor of pyramid schemes. Confirmed here.
Oh god, the Illuminati. Here we go.
Oh,
yeah. I think they're actually both. I think they're both right. I think Carmac wants a big pool of people playing the games to figure out who will rise to the top. And then Noah's job is to grab that cream and take them with his power and infrastructure and money the next level. But you gotta have what Carmac wants for you to even find that person, Noah, to make even better, right? So I think you're both kind of right. Although you're a little heavier on, doesn't matter who I find, I'll find him, I'll make him better. Carmac wants a bigger pool for you to fish in, I guess. I am very much in the middle of this. Like I said at the beginning, I want the European model because I want the players to have the ability to go up and down, win and lose, agony of victory, thrill of defeat, and I want guys like Noah to have to fight for it. Right? I want the next Noah to have a shot to be a big team owner. And if in a closed system, we can't again, if you go back to traditional sports, the only way I can be an NFL team owner is if I have billions of dollars and those actual owners vote me in. That's like the definition of an old boys club, right? So I like, I like the idea that again, that man
to the end is epic.
Well, so to speak, old boys club, right? You know what I mean? Like you can't get in. So I like the idea of some sort of relegation. Maybe the relegation is really tough, so it's hard to lose that spot. So Noah gets a good chunk of his comfortableness in his negotiations and his sponsorship deals. Like he's got a pretty good shot of staying there as long as he doesn't really fuck it up. But there's a chance that like Shanghai Dragons is gone. They're gone, right? Sure. They're gone. They haven't won a fucking game. So the new guy, the Phoenix Fibers, should get that fucking spot next season, Noah. Who do I talk to? I'm calling Nate. So, and I don't know if anyone will pick a quasi system. Like I said, EPL and ECS kind of are, right? There is a relegation in the online shit. But that's those leagues are not even on the scale of Overwatch League or LCS in the sense of the scope and the money. So I don't really compare them in that sense. Like they're kind of our online leagues that just lead to big LAN events, really. So I don't, there's no right answer. I think what the cool part about it is we're now seeing experimentation, right? We're seeing what Overwatch League's doing. We're seeing what LCS is doing. We're seeing what Rainbow Six is doing with their quasi-league system. We're seeing what FACEIT is doing with more of a permanent league system with their thing. We're seeing what H1Z1 is doing in Las Vegas with a closed system. So again, it's crazy time for esports, right? And your Jerry Springer-ist would be love yourself, love each other. Let's be good to each other out there. See you next time, folks.
This video was supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Mikkel Hansen, Bash, Daniel Yordanov, Yordan Tsenkov, TTMXMP, VeXii, HawpT, Robert Baxter, Travis Greb, and a special thanks to Jerky's Minion. Do you want to get teasers for my upcoming work? Find out who's coming next, what topics are being discussed? Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest to appear on one of my shows or in one of my videos? Would you like to ask a question in my monthly Patreon AMA, or perhaps even discuss esports as part of a discussion show I run on a monthly basis? Donators can also discuss the topics expounded upon in my videos with me and the other patrons on our Patreon page. All of this and more at the Patreon link below.